Hello everybody, we are back doing our averaging program which helps us find the grades, our grade average. If this is new, I would suggest going back and looking at some of our other videos to kind of catch up so that you can keep along with us in this video. Today we're going to be talking about where to put the variables. So as of right now, we have put these wonderful variables in here, some used, some not, but as you can see they're all in the method button compute click. And the first thing I'm going to establish about this is all within these two curly brackets. This curly bracket is often referred to as a scope. Now, scope doesn't necessarily have to affix itself only to a method. It can do a couple different ones. But what this says is that everything contained in here stays in here. You know, it's like the old Las Vegas adage, you know, what goes on here stays in here. So a variable named test1 exists in here, but as soon as we go outside of this, it no longer exists. So today we're going to talk about the three different types of variables, and actually in terms of scope. And actually there's a few more than this, but these are I'm going to call the three basics. We got a global variable which can exist anywhere in the program. Now that's good news. It's fun, but it can get you into a lot of trouble because if you're working with a team of 70 people and they all put 70 global variables in, then all of a sudden you have 4,900 global variables, and you have to worry about stepping over somebody else's variable. So they got rid of that in C#. You cannot do a true global variable, but whenever you get rid of something that's terribly useful, like a global variable, or I always say the go-to statement, which everybody hates but I love, they always find a way to come back and replace it with something that almost does the same thing. So there's this thing called a field variable which will allow us to have a kind of a semi-global effect. Then we have the local variable, and that's what we've done so far. We've only created the local variables, and to get an idea of how this works or how this is stunted, let's go ahead and use one. So let's say I like the string your average here, right? And I want to use it somewhere else in the program. Let's say I want to be able to click on this guy and be able to change that. So I'm going to double click into here, and as you can see I start with a whole new method called label output click, and then I say something to the effect of I want to change this to not your average, but get rid of that space and say your average, and then spit it back out to the label title text. Now what you'll see here right away is that squiggly line. Title 2 does not exist. Well, and the first thing, you know, somebody who starts off programming here says, yes, it does. It's right here, right? But the problem is that it only exists in here. So these are kind of like virtual realities. I can't go from one virtual world to another virtual world and exist. If I do that, I actually have to put the word string in here, which can be dangerous, but in this context it's safe. Now this title 2 here, we might think, oh, well, this is the same as this title 2. No, anytime you declare, you know, with the variable, the data type here, this means that it's a totally new variable. And what does that mean? Well, that means if I go onto the memory card, I have a title 2 space in one spot and another title 2 space in another spot, and I store two different values in those spaces. So that can be a little problematic, right? But in this case it could work. So let's go ahead and hit start. If I click on this, and remember, you might have to go back a couple of videos, that labels can act as buttons. So if I do click on this, it should change this to your average. Like you, maybe I should, maybe this, maybe I should change it to your average. So your average. So every time I click on it, it says your average up there instead of actually giving it the old title. But let's say now you want to say, well, and this is another problem to this piece, is that it starts off with the word label 1 up there. Well, I don't want label 1 up there, right? That seems kind of silly to have that not change until I hit the compute button or this label button. Oops, and it didn't like that. Well, it didn't like that because we didn't actually put any numbers in there. So we'll talk about error catching in a little bit. So let's go ahead and put some numbers in there. Let's say we got a lot of extra credit this week. And now find your averages there. Why does the title not come up right away? Well, you can change in two ways. One, you can just go ahead and put it in there, because remember the label 1 piece is here. Oops, I clicked on form 1. The label 1 piece is here. There's its name in terms of the coding, and here's its name in terms of what you see on the piece. So I could change it to your average here, and sometimes that's the better way to go because you know exactly how it's going to lay. Because as you can see from my form, this guy goes a little askew. Shoot, I did the same thing again. Goes a little askew every time. But let's say you want to get tricky with it. Let's say, oh, I want to make this a variable overall. Well, this is what you can do. You can change it into a field variable. So going back to the little printout here, field variables are declared at the class level and can span multiple scopes. I'll have to change that. So let's do that in our program. Let's let it span multiple scopes. So what is a multiple scope? Well, we have a scope here, right? There's a curly bracket, and we have a scope here. So the only way to get that to exist in both of them is to do it at the class level. And what does that mean? Well, first thing I'm going to tell you to do is we just use title 2 here, right? So let's go ahead and take the word string out of here. I know that's dangerous because we have not officially declared it, but we are going to declare it at this level. See where it says partial class form 1? If I go ahead and say string title 2 semicolon, all of a sudden now you have the squiggly line goes away here and the squiggly line goes away here. Be very careful with this. If you try to put string in this spot, that's going to be dangerous because essentially, again, you're going to say this is another variable and I'm going to try to override what you've already established. So if you do that, what I would suggest is go ahead and take that out. Now all of a sudden you can have this guy exist in multiple spots and mean the same thing. Let's go ahead and start. We still have the word label 1 here, right? Because that's its default. Remember when I said in one of the previous videos, when if you don't initialize something, you get what's left. Well, in this case, this is what was left behind. So what you want to do here is put in the term find your average. Again, using double quotes because it's a string, and as you guys remember, I'm sure this is what's referred to as a string literal. So if this is the case there, we don't want this, I don't know, maybe want to play with this down here. So find your average. You could say in title 2, find your average, or we could just say in this case your average is found. Hello, maybe, I don't know. Hello, your average is found. So now when we start it up, it's still not reading it. Why? Because we haven't put the text, assigned it to the text box yet. Remember, it only gets assigned to the text box right here in this scope and right here in this scope. So can we do that here? Well, let's give it a try. So, and I'm going to have to remember what that text box was called. I believe it's called, let's label, oh yeah, label title, that makes sense. Label title. And you can see that it does not like it. Now the interesting thing, and maybe you picked this up already, is that the label title can exist outside of the scope. So this label title exists outside of label output, and it also exists out of button compute, because essentially it's kind of like a field object. This object up here exists, and it doesn't exist only inside this button when we compute it, because it starts up with the form. So what can we do here? Well, let's do title 2. Okay, now it still doesn't like it. So let's read what it says. Does not exist in current context. Well, that's because the class is just in its beginning stages at this point. It exists. We essentially declared it up here, and then we put a string into it, but it doesn't know all the components of it or all the objects within it. So it doesn't know that there's a text box here, it doesn't know there's a button here, it doesn't know there's a label up here. Well, when does it do it? Right here in the public form one. So let's go ahead and do a Control X, cut, and then paste it here. Now it has no problems because it's initialized all the pieces of the form. So now all of a sudden the text boxes exist, the button exists, the labels exist, everything's good, and when we start this up, we should see the word find your average. And if I put some dummy numbers in here, let's give ourselves really good grades this time. Let's go ahead and give us 100. It says, hello, your average is found. It updates the title, and it updates this. And if I click on this guy, it says your average. Well, not really. I mean, unless the average class is just an exceptional class. Anywho, so now we know how to update these guys. We know what variables exist. This, remember, is a field variable which can exist in both the button compute click and the label output. The last piece of this puzzle we saw here, and we're going to get to this in the next video, is what happens when nothing gets filled and we don't know what's going on. We get this nice little thing called exception. So in the next video we're going to look and just handle very simple exceptions, which is essentially an error. What do we do when we don't get the response we expected? Whether it's a string and we're expecting a number, or a number and we're expecting a string, whatever. So come back and see that one.